When the Wild Eye crew came to Dallas to shoot special features for the re-release of The Abomination, they had a lot of questions for me about my film career, and that was really a long time ago. So I wasn't really on point as far as specifically talking about the movies I had made and when I made them and where they fell in the timeline. This is my attempt to sort of create a somewhat reliable timeline of my career as a filmmaker. In 1983, I co wrote a screenplay called Nestlings with a guy named Lon Bixby. Lon's aunt was friends with Peter Fonda, so we were able to option the screenplay to Peter Fonda for $1, which was actually a good deal for us because it kind of put us on the map and gave us a little bit of credibility. Somewhere around 1984, I produced and co-directed a feature called Tabloid. About 1985, we did two productions back to back. The first one was The Abomination. The second was Ozone, Attack of the Redneck Mutants. Both films were shot in Poolville, Texas. A year or two after that, on my own, I made a feature film called Highway to Hell, starring my then wife, Blue Thompson, and Richard Harrison, who had had quite a spectacular career back in the 1960s in Italian movies. After that, Fred Olin Ray hired me to do Macon County War. After Macon County War, I was casting around for something to do. I got in touch with Dave Dakota. He hired me to do a couple of super low budget shot on video features. I think they were shot in a weekend each. The first was called Redneck County Fever, and the second one was called Reanimator Academy. Somewhere around here, I edited a feature-length festival documentary that had been shot at the Earth Day celebration in Dallas, Texas in 1992, featuring Pearl Jam and a lot of other big musical artists, alternative artists at the time. I was able to talk David Winters at AIP into giving me a project, and the first film I did for him starred Joe Estevez and was called Armed for Action. It was also shot in Poolville, Texas. Not too long after that, I did a second movie for AIP called Blood on the Badge. Somewhere in here, I was hired by Fred Olin Ray to write a screenplay. I think I originally called it Athena's Last Stand. He changed it to Lethal Betrayal, I think, or something. It finally came out as Fatal Justice. I didn't direct. I was busy doing other stuff at that time. I was working at Allied Film and Video, which was a film lab and post-production house, and a movie called Troll 2 was being edited there by an Italian editor named Vagno Amici. I became friends with Vagno. Vagno introduced me to Fred Williamson, and Fred Williamson came to Dallas to shoot a couple of films. The first one was Steele's Law, and the second one was 3 Days to a Kill. I was eager to make more movies for David Winters at AIP, and one day they called me up out of the blue, asked me if I would be a producer on a big budget movie. They were doing big budget being $800,000 in Mobile, Alabama, called Mardi Gras for the Devil. What I didn't know at the time was he was in financial difficulty. He was late paying all the talent, and they really just needed an inexperienced producer to come in and sort of be the fall guy for all the heat that was being generated by their financial shenanigans. While working on Mardi Gras for the Devil, I struck up an acquaintance with a grip named Tom Fenton. He stayed in touch with me. He really wanted to make a movie. Eventually, he raised about $35,000, and he came to Dallas, and we did a picture called Striking Point, starring Christopher Mitchum. I was friends with Brownie Brownrigg, who was famous for movies like Don't Look in the Basement and Poor White Trash Part 2. I was also acquainted with Brownie's son, Tony, and Tony and a couple of friends had gotten together and started a company called Open Door Productions. Now, Open Door Productions was instrumental in getting Striking Point made. Afterwards, they asked if I would help them put together a feature project. So I came on board as a producer for a movie that was originally called Cyberstalker and later became The Digital Prophet. Right after that, a guy named Chris Heldman, who was a martial artist, came to me and wanted me to produce a film for him called Takedown. The film was made. I couldn't find any artwork for it, but we did it early in 1995, and it featured Richard Lynch as the villain. A really low budget shot on video thing that I produced was called Space Varmints. It was written and directed by Gary Kinnemer, featured little space creatures played by my son Josh McCormick and his friend Colin Moore. The film was pretty much lost until recently. I understand Gary is now finally finishing it up. Children of Dracula was a feature-length documentary we did on actual blood drinkers. I did a feature film based on a screenplay by Ted Newsom called Time Tracers. It featured Jeffrey Combs. Right after Time Tracers, I did a movie that I wrote called Biotech Warrior. The famous Replicator, which has, next to The Abomination, become my most famous movie. We had a bunch of film stock left over from Biotech Warrior, and I challenged Keith Jornas to write a screenplay within a week, and we were going to try and shoot the film within 4 days. We did shoot a film within 4 days, but it was only 75 minutes long. Later, Win Winberg of Ares Productions hired Gunnar Hansen and Brink Stevens. We shot some additional footage and gave it the appropriate running time of 90 minutes. At the end of 95, I contacted Roger Corman and asked him to help me squeeze in one more film before the year was out. He thankfully took me up on my offer. He sent me a screenplay called Street that had been written by a lady called Kat Shea and actually made into a movie years before. We gave it the Texas treatment and called it Rumble in the Streets. The reason we chose that title, or Roger chose that title, is because Rumble in the Bronx had just come out. I did a second film for Roger Corman called The Protector. It featured Lee Majors and Ed Marinero and a screenplay by Chris Heldman. And after that, it was about 25 years before I made another film. That's the one you're watching right now, Christmas Craft Fair Massacre.